Welcome to the 2026 Young Catholic Professionals Conference. We are here at the FIO podcast booth with our special guest, Father Ambrose.
Thanks, Natasha.
Father Ambrose, this is your first Young Catholic Professionals Conference.
It is,
right?
yes. I was so happy to be invited.
What do you think so far?
Great. This is such a great demographic, young people of various ages who are just figuring out how to be the best Catholic Christians they can. I love this age group.
So what is a young Catholic professional, right?
Well, I think that, some obviously people who are working in the world, that they have some kind of professional engagement, whether they're business owners or employees, or just simply trying to make their way in the world as lay people who are trying to be faithful to Christ and his gospel and the church. So they tend to be young. I don't know what the demographic age is, but I would say anybody between the age of, let's say, 20 and maybe 40, something like that.
Yes. 20s to 39 is what we
39,
say
yes.
our chapters.
So they're young, they're Catholic, obviously, or searching, and they're professional in some capacity.
Yes, for sure. And really, too, what we share with our YC peers is you're called to bring all three of those to everything that you do.
Absolutely.
Right? The
right.
young, the joyfulness, the cheerfulness, the Catholic, right? And then the professional.
Yes.
Right? And how you show up. Excellence always.
I think one of the features that I've intuited here in these last few days, of course, I meet young Catholic professional chapters around the country. I do a lot of traveling, a lot of public speaking, and it seems like one of the things that sets YCP apart is the fact that there's also this emphasis on family life and how it's not just in the workplace, but as you said, it's sort of an integral Catholic life in all of life. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And Father Ambrose, right now we're focusing on our patron of this conference, Blessed Takayama, which is very different for us. Typically, we choose European saints.
Right.
Now, I'd love to hear from you. How has Takayama inspired you?
Well, I didn't know much about him. There's one of the parishes that so I'm a Norbertine canon regular. My monastery is in Southern California, St. Michael's Abbey. And we have a parish, we run a few parishes in Southern California, one of which is in Wilmington, which is in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. There's a statue of Blessed Takayama Ukon in the garden. The Japanese community there wanted to set up a statue. So the first I heard about him was a few years ago when I saw this statue there at our Norbertine parish. In the intervening few years, I've had the opportunity to be on pilgrimage in Japan at some length and tracing the Japanese Christians and especially the martyrs. And so I've grown really to fall in love with the Japanese missionary moment of the 16th century. And it's really good, I think, for us to see how our faith has been enculturated and also evangelical in places like the Far East. That's so important because, of course, we American Catholics, most of our roots are from Europe. And if we're Central American or South American Catholics, even there, our roots are ultimately from Europe. And the faith is universal. Catholicism is universal. And so it's great to see other parts of the world, how the faith works and how compelling it is. And he's a really powerful example of that. An unusual saint.
Yes.
The fact that he came from the samurai class and was really the very upper elite of Japanese life. And one of those few, I think there were only two daimyos who were Catholics. So I think there were only two, but it was only a few of these regional governor class people who converted, and their whole daimyo, their whole area also converted.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
He's a fascinating person.
Yeah, he is. I think as a team, we've learned a lot about him. Hopefully our attendees are also learning. And he's just really a good example, especially in the world we live in now, right? He was someone who had, by worldly measures, what you would say success, right?
He had everything.
Everything.
Really.
And he said he renounced it all for Christ.
He was willing to give it all up for Christ when the pressure from further up in the political chain was bearing down upon the Catholic converts. It's okay. Well, then I'll give up my status as a samurai and as a political elite, member of the political elite, because the gospel and his identity as a Catholic was more important to him than those other worldly goods. Beautiful. That's a really important witness for us, I think.
What does that look like for us
Yes.
as Catholic professionals, right? Because not all of us are in politics or have an entire empire, right?
Yes.
But what does it look like for us as Catholics?
Well, every one of us is put to the test. That's how the world hates us. As St. John says, he tells us that the world hates us because we're believers, because the world is fallen. So every single person in the ecosystem of young Catholic professionals will come up to a point where they're called to make a choice. Do I profess my allegiance to Christ and his church, or do I capitulate to the demands of this world? And that might look like being willing to say the right thing in a conversation where someone is challenging your faith about sexual morality, or about bioethics, or about even just the Catholicism that is surrounding us. And I'm sure a lot of people face that in the workplace. Are you willing to stand up for the truth of the gospel, even if that means you're going to have to sacrifice something, your reputation, maybe your job? So it's real. Our Catholic witness is real, and each of us has to have our eyes and our minds and our hearts open to where the Holy Spirit is inviting us to be courageous with our witness. So, and it might be subtle. It might just be when someone says, "Oh, I don't know about this particular teaching of the church." You say, "Well, I do, and I believe it, and here's why." Joyfully, peacefully, non-threateningly.
And I want to talk a little bit. One of our attendees are playing this game. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes.
At the bingo card, right? And so at YCP, one of the beautiful things that we try and cultivate within this community is giving access to our chaplains. Every chapter has at least 2 chaplains. At this conference, we try and bring in as many as we can from religious life, different orders, because for a lot of people, this might be the first time they experience, we have our Meet the Religious coffee hour this
Yes.
morning, right? And we've had people discern religious vocations, right? Because of someone they've met here.
Yes.
I'd love to hear your story.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share that, Natasha. It's always a little bit strange for us to speak about ourselves, but it's a witness. I wear a habit. Consecrated religious wear a habit because our profession is a public profession of the Evangelical Council. So in a way, my life has to be a public one because people need to see that witness. So in any case, I had never heard of the Norbertine order. We're a very ancient order in the church, founded in 1121. So one of the more ancient orders, and we're what we're called canons regular. So these are priests who live a monastic life following the rule of St. Augustine. Back in the first 1,000 years and a little bit more, the first 1,200 years of the church, there were only 2 kinds of ways that a man could be a religious. He could be a Benedictine, following the rule of St. Benedict, and that was mostly for lay people, for laymen. Or he was a cleric, and he followed the rule of St. Augustine. So both of those underwent some serious reform in the 12th century. St. Bernard of Clairvaux and St. Norbert reformed those 2 ways of religious life. They knew each other. They were companions and friends. So I got to know the Norbertine order when I was an undergraduate in college. I had been educated by the Jesuits. I went to a Jesuit boys' school, so I knew the Jesuit order. And my parents, I grew up in a very pious Catholic family. Both of my parents discerned religious life themselves when they were young people. So the possibility of religious life or the priesthood was something that was spoken about in my family. It wasn't a strange or unusual thing. So when I met the Norbertine order through my academic study of medieval history, I was intrigued by this combination of monastic discipline and priestly ministry. And then I happened to meet a Norbertine from a different abbey, from an abbey outside of Philadelphia. So I visited that abbey. I was a wayward youth running away from what I had intuited was a religious vocation or priestly vocation, but I was running as far away from that as I could as a young man, and ended up finally stopped running from the Lord and his call when I was in graduate school. So I entered the monastery I joined in California, St. Michael's Abbey. I entered that when I was 25 years old.
And you spoke to being a witness, right? Especially through the appearance, right? And as young professionals, a lot of us are in blazers and suits. How can we be witnesses too in the day to day?
Well, I
We
think
might
that,
not have the
yes,
habits, but
sure. I think that, you know, our Catholic faith is not just something that we put on Sunday when we go to Mass or daily Mass or when we're with our family. It's not a private matter, it's a public matter. And that means that our Catholic faith needs to inform everything about our life, our comportment, how we speak, how we dress. So I think that striving for excellence because we're servants of the gospel and followers of Jesus Christ will be reflected in everything we do. So it would be great if the members of YCP look and act like Catholics in such a way that someone in the office might say, "You're always so well turned out. Why is that?" Or, "Tell me about that crucifix that's hanging from your neck." Or, "Why do I always see you at the lunch hour taking a walk around the office with your rosary?" Something like that. So there are signs of our faith, which are public signs, praying before meals, even at a business luncheon, that kind of thing, where we're showing the world that we're not ashamed of who we are as Catholics. Our first identity is as a Catholic Christian. Uh, and then we're also, hopefully patriotic Americans and so forth, members of a certain family, all of this. But our first allegiance, our first identity comes from being a Christian, a Catholic Christian.
what would you say makes someone unshakable in their faith?
Yes, I would say two things come to mind. One is that unshakability is born of courage. Courage to proclaim the gospel, courage to bear witness to the gospel, courage. So that comes from the cardinal virtue, fortitude.
Mm.
Fortitude is the virtue that leads one to being unshakable. So I say that. And then also, I think an unwillingness to be not just corrupted by the world, but discouraged by the world or discouraged by my own sinfulness. So courage and hope. Hope is that the virtue that is counter to this sort of despair that we might give into when I see, gosh, family life is difficult or professional life is difficult or my own sinfulness and weakness is so difficult for me to live with. We need hope in that if we're going to be unshakable.
Thinking
So,
about hope, what we're seeing this, at least the media is portraying this resurgence, right? Especially in the Gen Zs, right? And I mean, the Wall Street Journal did this whole report on
yes.
how Catholic Mass is now the new nightclub in New York, right? What gives you hope when you look at young professionals?
Well, I think just that the hope I see, and I'm not a young Catholic professional, I'm a middle-aged man who can look sort of onto this generation from a little bit of an outsider's perspective. The fact that the world has offered very little, the fallen world has offered very little to Gen Z and to the generation just above them, they aren't dissuaded by that. They see, I'm looking for something more than what the world has to offer that I see on my phone or that I see from my very worldly peers. And so they're not dissuaded by these illusions of the world anymore, where 30 years ago or 40 years ago, or certainly when I was coming of age, the world was very, very attractive. And so there wasn't such a clear demarcation between the hopelessness of the material world and the hope that comes through Jesus Christ. So I'm very encouraged, and my hope is strengthened when I see that young people are like, you know what, not interested in the illusions of the world. I'm going to throw my lot in where I know that I will be nourished, and that is in the Holy Catholic faith. That's really awesome. That gives me great hope. We're going to, I think, in the next 15 years, 10 to 15 years, the church is going to go off a demographic cliff as the baby boomer generation dies. That means there's going to be a lot of parishes close, a lot of schools will close. The institutions are going to really diminish, the visible institutions of our faith in North America. But the young people who are faithful are present and committed because they're not just doing it because they're going through the motions, like maybe that oldest generation does. they might not be so interested in really believing, but they go to Mass every Sunday because they have to. Whereas young people, Gen Z, they're not going to go just because they have to. They go because they want to. And that gives me great hope.
And one last question, Father. What is a goal you're currently pursuing?
I have a project that I'm working on assigned by my abbot and by my community for the renewal of Catholic education. It's called the Evermode Institute, and we're doing what we can to communicate the faith, teach the faith to those who teach the faith, teachers, administrators in Catholic schools, catechists in parishes. And that's a goal I'm pursuing with my confreres, this project of simply trying to communicate the truths of our faith to the next generations. We failed to do that as the church for the last 2 generations, pretty badly, actually. So if people are going to have a real encounter with Jesus Christ and learn the faith in a Catholic school or in their parish catechism classes, those people who are teaching it need to know it. So this is something I'm working on, a goal I'm pursuing with my confreres as a way of trying to help Christ to save souls right in this day and age.
And a lot of our young professionals are either young parents or about to be young parents. What can they do to support that mission, right? To make sure that they're instilling that love for the meaning and not going through the motions.
Well, the first educators are parents. There was a trend, which still continues in a lot of places, where parents abscond their duty to communicate the faith because they figure the school's doing it or the parish, catechism classes are doing that, but they're not. The parents are the ones who have to be the first educator, the first and primary educator of their children. So young parents or people about to be parents need to know the faith well enough and love it deeply enough to communicate that to their children. And then to be very discerning that the school or the parish is doing that too. And if it's not, to speak up. Say, you know what? We don't want watered down Catholicism. We want the full truth. We want the fullness of truth. So people really have young parents and young people about to be parents really need to embrace that responsibility.
Courage
and hope.
And hope.
Yes.
Father, thank you so much for being here this
You're
weekend.
Welcome. It's my joy, Natasha. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Make sure that you listen to Refiner's Fire. We have all our episodes cataloged on the FIO app.